Nigeria. It's happening right now. There's ongoing strike by the Academic Staff Union of Universities in Nigeria, as well as the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's conversation is centered on strike. When workers go on strike, who pays the price? And tonight we want to be able to look at the lessons for Africa. How can Africa deal with strike issues? How can Africa how can African governments address workers, have government worker relationship to such an extent that to seek redress, it doesn't have to be the worker striking. That's the conversation tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, when workers go on strike, who pays the price? Do you have an idea? Because usually when workers and the government, in this case, we're looking at government, we're looking at strike that has to do with the government. So if workers and government are not able to see eye to eye, and they are not able to come to terms of agreement, or there are breaches in the terms of agreement, and while these negotiations are going on, and while the back and forth is going on, and then you have strike, who pays the price? Now, I want to introduce someone to you that oftentimes and all the time pays the price when there is a strike. Strike happens between the workers and government, but there is the third person in the room that strikes get to affect, and nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about them. In this case, it's the universities that are going on strike. Now, there's a third person in that room. There is a young boy from our village whose parents had worked so hard to put some funds together in order to send them to the university. They get to the university, and then suddenly there is a strike. The academic activities is cut short. They have to spend extra time in school. Their accommodation fee is going. They've got to feed. They've got to pay transportation. At the end of the day, you have heavy costs coming on students. Heavy cost coming on students. Now, who pays them? When the striking lecturers or the striking workers and the government get to settle, who pays? Who pays or who compensates those that suffer the most during the striking period? Because after the strike, at the end of the day, the workers get to receive their entitlement in arrears. So, but what happened to the ordinary persons that have suffered so much as a result of the strike? Now, you want to talk about the striking Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria. Imagine someone who needs to be from Abuja, needs to be in Lagos, or needs to be in Sokoto, or needs to be in another state, or needs to travel out of the country for an engagement. And the person cannot travel because workers are on strike. Imagine that someone who is rendering certain services is not able to render those services because there's an ongoing strike. Ladies and gentlemen, after the strike, who pays? Who compensates those that suffer the most? Has anyone ever had that kind of conversation in Nigeria? I remember growing up early in school, a program that ought to spend 4 or 5 years. I end up spending 7 years plus. There are several students who spend a program of 6 years. They get to spend 8 years in school, not because they are not they are failing their courses, not because they are failing any subject, but as a result of strike actions. So for those additional years, who pays them? Who compensates them? Does the government compensate them or the workers? Has that conversation ever happened? That those that suffer the most when there is a strike, who compensates them? Shouldn't there be a compensation for the student? Shouldn't there be a compensation for those that will suffer as a result of strike actions? This is year 2026. For heaven's sake, does Nigeria have any business with striking workers in any aspect of our national life? Should there even be strike? Should there even be conversation on strike? Now, ladies and gentlemen, for the universities, as I said, this has been a serious issue for many, many years, and this is 2026. I graduated here 2006, and during my stay I had extra years as a result of strikes. Now 20 years after, there's still ongoing strikes. What is happening in Nigeria? What is happening in Africa? Recently, I'd spoken about the health sector, and I've spoken about the 2027 elections, and I did say something that personally, I'm looking forward to a president in 2027 that would commit to receiving medical care here in Nigeria. And I'm looking forward to governors of states, ministers receiving medical care here in Nigeria. You want to change, you want to cause a revolutionary change in the health sector? That will be the motivation. Now we live in a country where the president, the governors, the ministers, and the politicians, the Senate president, the House of Representative leader, and all of that, or the members of the National Assembly, you will find them. This year, you could count a number of ministers and governors who have traveled abroad. For what? That have traveled abroad, beginning from Abuja. A lot of them, governors, ministers, who have traveled abroad for graduation. Their kids, all of them, majority of them, are studying in the US, in China, in the United Kingdom, in France, Canada, and the rest. They enjoy the educational system there. They enjoy themselves and their children enjoys the the steady and uninterrupted educational systems abroad. But why the educational system here in Nigeria suffers? And this is the case across Africa, unfortunately. This is the case across Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, should we be talking about the universities, the educational system? Education is one of the primary requirements for development. And yet, in the year 2026, we are still talking about strikes, the university system being shut down as a result of strikes. Who compensates the ordinary man? Who compensates the ordinary child, the child of an ordinary citizen? A boy that has to work by himself to pay his tuition fee. He has to work to sort himself out in schools. He's now meant to pay and spend additional months and sometimes additional years in school. Who compensates them? Has there been any conversation concerning compensating students? Of course, to the leaders, this is no priority to them because their kids are all abroad studying. Go on strike for all I care. That's what they will say. It's none of their business. Should we be looking at a system where politicians should, at this time, have their kids study in Nigerian universities? What is the funding like for higher institutions in Nigeria? Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes when things like this happen, it's really very disheartening. Absolutely disheartening that we live in a country where the schools, the universities will be shut down as a result, for whatever reason, be it welfare, funding, and all of that. Should this be happening in the first place? What's you look at all of this thing is pointed at one factor, like that this is a clear indication that there's responsibility in Africa. If not, education should be a national security issue. It's supposed to be something that is considered national security. Education. Recently, we saw ministers in the US posing with their kids that have just graduated. We saw them in the UK. They shamelessly take pictures and videos and put it out on there on social media for the world to see, and say, hey, we don't care how the educational system in Nigeria is. If you guys like sort yourself out or not, my kids are simply in abroad studying. They get to finish, they get to graduate when they are supposed to graduate. They take pictures as serving ministers, serving governors. The former presidents of Nigeria they also traveled abroad to take pictures. He was still the president. They traveled abroad. The family traveled abroad to take pictures of their kids graduating from a school in abroad. It's a shame. It's a shame. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want us to look at strikes as simply a fight between workers and government. It's not just between workers and government. There is a third person. And that third person is the one that suffers the most. The students. The young people that have managed to get themselves into the university system, into public universities, and are meant to pay the price. Do they get to receive any compensation for the lost time? I think it's high time that the students in Nigeria begins to come together under the leadership of the Students' Union government to begin to demand compensation from the government. Because who pays them? You are keeping them the more in school. A program of 4 years. They spend more than 4 years, not as a result of their own doing, not because they are not passing their subjects, but because the government and the workers, or the lecturers, if you may, are fighting over welfare, over funding, and all of that. I think it's high time that those that suffer the most, the students, are factored into it. Same with the aviation strike. Those that ought to travel and are unable to make the trip because there's a strike action should be compensated. It's not their fault. They should be compensated. If the government begins to pay massive compensation, I think they are going to sit up. But the government and the workers, if they're like at the ASUU, they are going to sit up. Anyway, who do they even care? Do they bother? The resources isn't theirs. They tend to use it as they want, especially in their flamboyant lifestyle. Ladies and gentlemen, am I saying that going on strike is wrong? No. The international ILO has recognized strike as a legitimate tool in seeking redress from employers, as the case may be. All right, it's a legitimate means of you seeking redress. In fact, it's a tool of agitation, strikes. So, but I'm having this conversation tonight to draw the attention to the fact that when strike happens, it is not just about the government and the workers or the lecturers or ASUU. It's not just about the both of them. There's also the third people that suffers the most. A student who is struggling to pay tuition fee, struggling to feed in school. We know the situation in this part of the world, especially the ordinary citizen. When I was in school, I struggled to pay my fee. I had no one to support me. I struggled to pay my fee. Most times I go to the construction site to work. I work for daily pay. Sometimes I have got to skip school to go work and get some money to fund myself. So someone that is surviving that way, and you suddenly shut down the school, and you now ask that person has to stay back and spend additional time in school, additional period in school. Shouldn't there be a compensation? Now, let's understand something. There are various reasons why workers go on strike. Sometimes as a result of unpaid salaries, poor wages, unsafe working conditions, unfulfilled agreement, poor staffing, lack of equipment, pension issues, unfair treatment, government employer failure to honor agreements. All right. Then we want to look at, as of this week, now ASUU has authorized, now listen, as of this week, ASUU has authorized branches in 20 universities. 20 universities. If you want to do a census to know the number of students, it will blow your mind. 20 universities to begin processes towards industrial action, and issued 14-day ultimatums over alleged failures in implementing agreement and resolving outstanding issues between, of course, agreement between the government and ASUU. So in this part of, I wonder why the government should do an agreement with ASUU without any intention of honoring the agreement. And after a while, everyone is back to the same point of industrial action, the same point of negotiations. It now becomes like a circle, a vicious cycle. Why should you in the first place have agreements that you are not willing to honor, or you know that that agreement will not be backed by credible and concrete policy for its implementations? Why is that? How unserious can we be in Africa? How unserious this is. How can you have an agreement and you don't put machineries in place to honor such agreement until after a while there has to be industrial action to compel you to honor agreement? You made an agreement. Both parties agrees on terms. You went back and refused to do your own part of the agreement. And then The other party have to now go on strike to force and compel you to honor your own agreement that you appended your signature to. Is that not craziness? I don't know. And again, the ordinary citizens suffer the most. Government, if the government doesn't care, if the workers say, well, this time around we must get what we want, and then the government doesn't care, who suffers? The ordinary citizens. Should it be like this? No. Shouldn't Africa have outgrown this at this time, 2026, about entering 2027? Shouldn't we have learned? I said 20 years ago, I was in school. The same problem, strike. Sometimes the school is shut down for 6 months as a result of strike. Sometimes for 12 months. Sometimes beyond 12 months. 14 months, 18 months. Strikes. That's over 20 years ago. 20 years later, we are still on that same point. Can't we make progress in Africa, for God's sake? This is not this is an African issue. Can't we make progress in Africa? Hey, every leader in Africa, you travel out of the country, you see what is happening in other nations of the world. And that's why you are sending your kids abroad to study. While your university is here, is left at a sorry state. No infrastructure, no modern facilities, no upgrade of facilities. You go to some schools, their laboratory, if the school is 50 years old, the laboratory has equipment that is 50 years old. Should we in Africa be having this conversation at this time? Strike? Universities? Can't we make progress for heaven's sake? Is it difficult? Is it rocket science to make progress? These leaders, they travel to China, they go to India, they travel to the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Russia, and the rest. They travel to Turkey, everywhere. They see what is happening in the educational system. And they quickly move all their children abroad to study. It is high time all of these governors, presidents, ministers, it's high time all their kids have to study here in Nigeria, in Africa. It's high time this happen. Because that is the solution that Africa needs. The same goes in the health sector. All of them, they've got to receive their medical care here. That is what Africa needs. That will be the required incentive for development in the educational system, in the health sector, and every other of our and all other aspects of our national life. This is the incentive that is required. They should all enjoy the same facilities that the ordinary citizens are enjoying. When the strikes happen, students lose academic time, parents face uncertainty, additional expenses, businesses around universities suffer. Of course, businesses around the university suffers. And the question becomes, why should a student repeatedly lose semesters because adults failed to resolve a dispute? Why should this be happening? Why should a student repeatedly lose semesters because adults failed to resolve dispute? And why should lecturers repeatedly work under conditions they believe are unacceptable because government and institutions haven't resolved their grievances? Why should it be like that? If the facilities here are beautiful, why are ministers, governors, and presidents of this country sending their kids abroad to study? Why? They should put them in a University of Abuja. There's Ahmadu Bello universities. There's the University of Lagos, that of Port Harcourt, in Sokoto, in Nasarawa. There are universities. The governor of Nasarawa State, why won't his children go to the Nasarawa State University? The governor of Lagos State, his children should go to Lagos State universities. The ministers here in Abuja, their kids should go to University of Abuja. Now, you also want to look at the aviation issue. Now, for the aviation, the disputes in the aviation sector, the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria. Now, the Trade Union Congress has backed the aviation workers' action, while the aviation regulator has called for dialogue and a return to negotiations. So where was this dialogue before the strike? Where was this dialogue? Must it always get to this extent before you now begin to react? Why are we like this in Africa? For everything is reactionary. No proactive measures to prevent this crisis. Why must it always be reactionary? And now they are on strike. All the people that will suffer as a result, who compensates them? As the government, the Federal Authority of Nigeria, are you going to compensate those that will suffer as a result of the strike, or as a result of your inability to sort out issue preemptively before it degenerate to strike actions? Who pays those people? Who compensates them? Of course, nobody. The ordinary people of this country continue to carry the burden every single day. They continue to carry the weight of insecurity. They carry the weight of poor economy. They carry the weight of failure in the educational system. They carry the weight of poor infrastructure. They carry the weight of poor electricity. They carry the weight of inadequate water supply. In fact, every home has to get their own source of water supply. They carry the weight of high cost of living. At the end of the day, the ordinary citizens get to carry all of this weight. Who compensates them? Nobody. Unfortunately, nobody. And citizens of Africa have, over the years, remained docile. And that's why every government in Africa feels they can always get away with whatever they do. So what happens when the sector being disrupted is one that connects businesses, families, and the wider economy, like the aviation, transportation? Aviation is particularly useful because the consequences are immediate and visible. The consequences of aviation strike is immediate and visible. Number one, you have business disruption, international connections is disrupted, financial losses, stranded families. Who compensates them? Who is going to compensate them? Don't you think it's high time people that will suffer as a result of the strike begin to come together and demand compensation for businesses lost, for time lost, for the pain and the torture they had to go as a result of irresponsibility from the leaders? Because come to think of it, should workers surrender their rights because their sector affects millions of people? No. We are not saying the workers of the airports should surrender their rights. No. We are saying leaders from both sides have got to be responsible. They've got to be responsive and not be reactionary. They've got to be responsive. This is very, very important. This is key. Now, you want to, this, of course, all of these issues have a global effect and there's a global perspective to it. Because I know this is not just a Nigerian problem. Though workers around, you may argue that, of course, workers around the world have gone on strike over wages, inflation, working conditions, pensions, job security, public sector funding, staffing, government policy, and all of that. But how the government, how the leaders addresses such issues now makes the difference. The existence, I'm not saying the existence of labor dispute in itself is as shown in any way that the country has failed. No, the country has not failed. Nigeria has failed. We are still hopeful that we, in our own lifetime, we would live in a country that is fair and just. A country that protects the most vulnerable. I believe in my lifetime, I should see a Nigeria when does a strike becomes too costly? Is there a point where you now look at going on strike becomes too costly? Because when you look at the effect on people, the effect on the economy, wouldn't it become more costly to be on strike? For example, if the striking workers and the government, if there is a law that says the striking workers and the government must have to compensate those that would suffer as a result of the strike, Don't you think both the government and the striking workers will always look for a better way to resolve disputes than striking and putting our families and individuals through difficult times? For example, the aviation situation. If all those whose flights are cancelled or travels are disrupted, they are unable to meet up with families, with meetings, or with connecting flights, and all of that, and they suffer as a result. If both the striking workers and the government are meant to pay compensation, don't you think they would always seek better ways of resolving dispute? Because you want to ask, why do government sometimes, most times, especially in our case, why would government most times wait? They wait, they drag their feet, they go to sleep until there's a threat of strike before you see any activity whatsoever. Sometimes, even with the threat of strike, you don't get to see any activities until the strike has dragged for some weeks before you begin to see activity. Why is that? We've seen strike in this country where the government would say, well, when they are tired of the strike, they are going to call off the strike by themselves. What level of irresponsibility? A serious government will negotiate early. On this platform, we've talked about agitation. That agitation in itself is not bad, especially positive agitation with a realistic goal. Agitation that has a realistic goal for the common good. Agitation is okay. But when they say there's an agitation, what's the responsibility of the government? Here on this platform, we've said, number one, there should be early negotiation. Early negotiation communicates clearly. There should be clear communications. Agreements should be honored, and that's one of the problems being tabled by ASUU, that the federal government had not honored agreements reached in the past. Okay, and then realistic timelines should be provided. Realistic timeline, because most times, if you just want to make, I think most times the government just want to make just want to agree on certain terms in order for the strike to be called off. So if you are agreeing, there should be realistic timelines so that you know that within that time frame you are able to solve that issues. Not that on the same agreement that you are a party to, that you agreed, you appended your signature to, you are not able to do your own part, and then the other party must have to go to strike again to compel you to do. And the government must acknowledge genuine grievances, create functional dispute resolution mechanisms. This is absolutely necessary. And on the other hand, to the workers have right, but the rights has to come with responsibilities. Is every strike truly necessary? It has to come with responsibilities, and the workers must have to ask themselves on this issue: is strike absolutely necessary? Have all meaningful negotiation channels been exhausted? Have they been exhausted? Is the action proportionate? Are vulnerable citizens being protected? Is the public being adequately informed? Are unions willing to return to negotiation table when meaningful progress is made? These are key. So even though workers have the right to go on strike, but it should come with responsibility. They should keep an open mind that, we want a solution, and then if there is good faith in progress being made, or if there is good faith from the other party, the striking workers should be able to listen and call up the strike soonest. Ladies and gentlemen, there are bigger problems that Africa should be tackling, and strike shouldn't be one of it. Africa should be funding education aggressively in medicine, in science and technology, AI, research and development, space. Africa funding education aggressively. But it's so unfortunate that we're talking about strike today. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage the government. I want to encourage the striking workers. Please, your rights comes with responsibility. It comes with responsibilities. And all the time, please, try as much as you can to consider the general public, the ordinary citizens that often carries the burden, the weight, and pays the price of these actions. And to the government, please, proactiveness is absolutely necessary in dispute resolution between striking work yourself. It's high time Nigeria and Africa move away from strikes, especially this kind of embarrassing ones. It's an embarrassment to our nation, an embarrassment to Africa. But meanwhile, I think the citizens of this country and the student should begin to ask questions on what compensation they would, moving forward, be receiving from the government and the striking workers. When strikes like this happen. My prayer that is that God help Africa, that so much that the next crop of leaders that will be emerging in Africa, when the next crop of leaders emerges in Africa, let them be leaders that are knowledgeable enough, have the compassion and competence to lead Africa out of the woods. Thank you so much, everyone. This is the much we can take on tonight's conversation on the striking workers here in Nigeria. We hope that this gets resolved as soon as possible. Thank you for being part of this conversation. My name is Chris Uloko, and I am the founder of Safe to Speak. Until I see you again, God bless you and have a beautiful evening from Abuja, Nigeria. Bye-bye.